Very important episode today. We've got now very good friend of the show, has joined us a few times, host of Locked On Colts. We've got Zach Hicks joining us to try to break down everything, make some sense of what's going on with the Indianapolis Colts and new interim head coach Jeff Saturday, who just recently had a press conference and maybe calm some folks down. Hopefully we'll find out what's going on there in Indy with Zach and Josh Allen. Could he miss some time? This is a huge one. UCL injury, arm injury for Josh Allen. What is the latest prognosis on his injury? The NFL does not, and definitely the Buffalo Bills do not want to lose a superstar quarterback. All that coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson. Thanks for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has all the latest odds, everything you could want in your sports betting adventures. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get into this conversation and bring on today's guest. We've got Zach Hicks. He is a co-host of Locked On Colts. And man, Zach, I got to thank you for carving out some time to jump on with Matt and I today, because I know you've been put through the ringer, been pulled in a million different directions, a press conference earlier today with Jeff Saturday, and hopefully you can help us make some sense of what's going on with the Indianapolis Colts right now after firing their head coach and now bringing in interim Jeff Saturday, who was not on the staff or any staff in the NFL.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know how to make sense of it. We're still kind of reeling here in the Indy market. I mean, you can ask any beat writer, any single person who was at that press conference. It was just insanity. Straight insanity. I know the national media was going crazy with the clips going from that night and the quotes and everything. You could see it on every single social media. You could see, these news sources running with it. But honestly, yeah, we're still reeling from it. And there's so many things that we could talk about with this press conference and with the decision to go with Jeff Saturday. And I feel like it could have been easily explained. You could have just gone out there for this press conference and said, hey, I wanted to go with a guy that I trusted just to evaluate this roster and evaluate the coaches on staff. So we're bringing in Jeff Saturday. But it just ended up being this whirlwind of so many different things. I mean, we could go into detail on what they said about analytics, on what they said about the Rooney Rule, on what they said about Frank Reich and Andrew Luck even. Like, it is absolutely insane what was said in that press conference. And I know you guys have been doing this a lot longer than me. You know, I've only been doing NFL stuff for about 5 or 6 years, but just from what you guys saw from the outside, I mean, this isn't normal, right? This is not normal at all.
Not normal at all. I mean, the Saturday thing, I think, is bonkers. I mean,
Yes.
Why not just promote someone on the staff or whatever? I mean, they're basically saying he's my spy is the way I interpret it. And we,
Right.
Evaluating all you guys. But what's crazier is the qualifications of the new play caller.
Right.
Please tell me about this young man. And I stress
And
young.
And Zach, I got to give you guys credit because I listened to the episode immediately following all this, and you guys were trying to make sense of it, and it sounds like I'd hoped you guys had, and it could help us, and still there's not a lot of sense that has been made. But you brought up a great point. Who's the best qualified person right now on the Indianapolis Colts in the building to call plays? It might have been Matt Ryan. That would have been kind of interesting. I love that point by you.
Maybe. He's been around longer than the new play caller.
Yeah, no, Jake mentioned that, and I was kind of laughing because they do have Scott Milanovic on staff. You know, he's their quarterback coach. He did call plays the final 5 games of the Jacksonville Jaguars season. I think it was 2017 or 2018. And then Scotty Montgomery, who called plays in college for a couple seasons as well. So they did have some guys who had at least called plays before. You know, Parks Frazier, it was funny. We couldn't even devote like the first segment of our podcast yesterday to talking about Parks Frazier being the offensive coordinator because there was just so much stuff to talk about. And the way that we kind of viewed it, I guess, in more of a glass half full type capacity was, look, you're starting Sam Ehlinger, a guy who anyone who studies the draft probably would have said is never going to be an NFL starter. It's never going to be a guy who's going to who's going to start 10 games in a row or whatever. That's what he's going to end up starting for the Colts. They're throwing Bernard Ryman at left tackle. They're starting a lot of young guys. So I don't know. Maybe this is their shot in the dark at trying to find a Sean McVay type or something like that. I don't know. I'm not saying that he's going to be that. I think that it is kind of crazy to assume that. But, 30-year-old play caller, like, what are you really learning from Scott Milanovic as your play caller? Because he's probably not going to be on staff next year. Why not let some young kid who's barely older than me call these plays and just see what happens? See if you find some magic there. But I'm with you guys. I think it's kind of insane. But we kind of joked about it on the Reaction podcast that, will they make Parks Frazier the offensive coordinator? And I said, you know what? It's insane, but everything's been insane up to this point, so why not? And it ended up happening. So
yeah, I mean, it's less insane than the rest of it, to be honest with you. But at the same time, like, teams go through so much, and it's just an interim coach anyway. So maybe we're all making a bigger deal about it just because it's unorthodox. And in reality, maybe it doesn't even matter. And at some point, like, at least, and I think you brought this up a little bit off the air, Jeff Saturday is good with the media. So at least you've got someone who can talk to the cameras and talk to reporters the rest of the season before they figure out what's really going on next year.
Yeah, I really think it could have been a lot less of this spectacle that it is right now with a better press conference. And I know Jim Irsay was not the perfect guy to handle that whole press conference because Jim Irsay, I love the guy. He is just a goofball, like old. He kind of just gives all the vibe of like an old rocker and stuff like that. Just a guy who like just sit back and he's way too honest. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And it was just a mess of a press conference with so many wrong answers and tone deaf responses. And I really think it's something where with the right answers and with some proper preparation, this could have been an easily avoidable situation. You could have just gone up there and been like, look, I trust Jeff Saturday. I trust him to come in and maybe help this offensive line. I trust him as a person. I've worked with him for a long time. That's why we're bringing him in. Instead, throwing shots at the media, throwing shots at the Rudy Rules, throwing shots at a bunch of other things. Like, it was just, it's really not that big of a story without that press conference. But because that press conference was so bad and because they kept moving it back to, you had so many hours to prepare. It was supposed to be at 6 p.m. and it got moved back to like 8:30, something like in the middle of that Monday Night Football game. Yeah, I mean, I wish you guys had Jake on here, my co-host with Locked On Colts, because he was actually at that press conference and he had much harsher words to say as a media person that was being, he was kind of having the shots thrown at him. I'm just some guy who was just sitting at home, like watching the whole thing unfold, but Jake was there. And yeah, man, I know he's been at press conferences for the last, for like half a decade or something like that. And he's never seen anything like that
Nothing
before.
quite like this one. Huh?
Yeah, nothing like that. And it's just absolutely insane. I really do think this story kind of got overblown because of how they handled it. If they just would have not been as defensive, if they just would have been open and honest, it would have been fine. But they were so defensive and so combative with everything. And it was just, it's become the media, storm that it is now.
Do you think there's an opportunity, Zach, for the rest of the coaching staff to be really annoyed by this? Because like getting passed over, like, you're going to bring this guy out of nowhere, and NFL jobs are hard to find. So, I wouldn't expect people to walk away from it. And someone like Parks Frazier gets a better shot now because of this whole situation. But some guys, maybe there's an old, offensive line coach or I don't know who would have necessarily been the best fit, the most obvious pick for interim head coach, but someone's got to feel a little burnt in the building by this.
Oh, real quick, just from my experience of being on staffs, this was my first thought is if it's Tuesday afternoon and they're not at practice and you're walking around the coach's area of any facility, it's a ghost town because all the offensive guys are in one room. All the other defensive guys are in one room. They're chewing, they're spitting, they're watching tape, they're preparing for this. And how can the other offensive coaches say, now we report to this kid who was a GA at Grand Valley State or whatever 2 years ago? Like, it's just such a bad message. And we're going to bump him over all of you.
Oh, there's so many bad messages here. I mean, Gus Bradley, a guy who has been in this league for a long, long time, who has been a head coach before.
Right.
I'm not saying
John
he was
Fox.
a great head. Yeah, John Fox. And if you wanted to go with a former player, Reggie Wayne is on staff.
Exactly.
You could have gone Reggie or Bubba Ventrone. If you wanted to go with that energetic, just got a goofball type guy, Bubba Ventrone was right there. There's so many better options. And again, explain it better and it can kind of work. But when you factor in the crazy decisions with a crazy press conference, it becomes this media storm that it is.
All right, more with Zach Hicks, trying to make sense of what's going on with the Indianapolis Colts. Let's focus a little bit more outside of the coaching staff and onto the field for this team going forward next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by SimpliSafe. If you thought about securing your home with home security, but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up right now because P&W listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. Yeah, half off. This is their biggest sale of the year, and you won't want to miss it. And here's why you will love it. Did you know that over the holidays, property crimes like burglaries and package theft spike nationally? That's why SimpliSafe Home Security is offering this discount to help you and your family feel more safe during the holiday season and beyond. And I love the crystal clear HD live stream of the security cameras. It gets the image that you need. If something does happen on your property, now you've got a clear image instead of some grainy image that doesn't help you out anyway. You can see what's going on the outside of your home when you're inside. You can see what's going on everywhere at your property when you are not at home. And there's any number of customizable sensors for any door or window that you want to be monitored at any time. Plus, of course, the 24/7 professional monitoring agents that use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real so you can get priority police response. So don't miss your chance to save big. The only security system we recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/LockedOnNFL today. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplisafe.com/LockedOnNFL. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So it's interesting that they did bring in an offensive lineman, a former offensive lineman, as interim head coach. And I think that's probably from our perspective, we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast. From the outside looking in, I think the biggest disappointment, the quarterback is one thing, maybe some things on defense. Obviously, the Colts lost Matt Eberflus too, but the offensive line was the best in the league and now is a shell of its former self. And it's really hard to be good on offense. We're seeing it throughout the league with a lot of other teams too. Is there something to be salvaged here? Is that why Jim Irsay decided to go O-line with his interim head coach to maybe fix that unit that could maybe help the young quarterback and help Jonathan Taylor and maybe salvage some things in the second half of the year?
Yeah, I'm not going to come on here and go crazy and say that with a good offensive line, this Colts team is the best AFC team in the league or something like that. There are a lot of issues with this Colts team, but I don't think we're seeing the team spiral out of control like we are right now if this offensive line were even playing at the level they were last season. And last season wasn't even the best season of the Frank Reich era when it comes to offensive line play. It has been a massive, massive downgrade all across the line. I mean, obviously, the two new starters and Matt Pryor at left tackle to start the season was a major bust. Danny Pinter at right guard was a major bust. And we've seen so many lineup changes to try to fix those busts. But also the guys who they've paid, again, Chris Ballard mentioned in that press conference, he said, you guys get on me about not drafting wide receivers. And now look what happens when I neglect the offensive line. It's like, this is the highest paid offensive line in all of football.
By far, right?
By far and away.
By far and
away. You're paying Quentin Nelson nearly $20 million a year. You're paying Braden Smith nearly $20 million a year. You're paying Ryan Kelly over $10 million a year. And all three of those guys have not been impressive this year. Now, some of that is because of those downgrades at left tackle and right guard, but also these guys who you were paying giant contracts to guys to be Pro Bowl or All-Pro players are not playing like that whatsoever. Outside of, Quentin Nelson, I still think has been pretty solid this season for the Colts. But yeah, maybe if it is a mental thing, a guy like Jeff Saturday can jump in and maybe try to get them out of this mental funk that they're in. But I think we've seen a lot with this offensive line this year that their peak play might just be below average. And if he can just get them to below average, maybe we can at least see some, more enjoyable Colts football, because it's been brutal to watch this season. I mean, I speak for all the fans that have watched the Colts this year. I mean, the offense has just been so brutal, with the offensive line just giving up sack after sack after sack. So if Jeff Saturday can improve that at all, we'll call this a win of a hire in that regard.
So Parks Frazier, I can't get over Parks Frazier. He may be a wonder kid, and I might be wrong, but I bet he isn't. And I fully expect them to lead the league by a wide margin going forward of delay of games, blown penalties. Like, getting a play in on time isn't easy, let alone whatever play you pick. Like, you got to react very quickly to get it from your mind through your mouth to the quarterback's mouth that the other 10 guys hear it before the play clock goes off. I bet the procedural stuff's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a couple weeks ago with Frank Reich, where Frank Reich mentioned when he was sharing kind of the head coaching duties with the play calling duties against the Tennessee Titans, there was a play where he was arguing about a missed penalty on the Titans. And then the very next play, he couldn't get an audible call or couldn't get in a hot read to Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan threw a pick six that ended up just being the back-breaking play of that entire game against the Tennessee Titans. That's from someone who's been around and been an offense coordinator for a long, long time, been a guy who's called plays for a long time, who's shared head coach duties with offensive coordinator. Now you're throwing in, like you said, a grad assistant, a kid who's been the assistant to the assistant to the QB coach or something like that. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And I think it was with the 33rd team, I think that website that has Phillips or whatever, the defense coordinator, Wade Phillips, the defense coordinator guy who has been a head coach for a long time as well. He said the biggest struggle that Jeff Saturday is going to have is managing all of that stuff on the field, managing, practice schedules, managing timeouts, managing challenges, managing what to do on the field. But I think the Parks Frazier thing is also kind of a fascinating thing, because again, Scott Milanovic and Scotty Montgomery are probably not your answer at offense coordinator, but they've done it before. They know how to make a game plan for a team. The most that you can say out of Parks Frazier is, he's been next to Frank Reich when Frank Reich has put together game plans, or been next to Frank Reich when Frank Reich has called plays during the game. But outside of that, there's no experience. So I'm with you. I think it is absolutely insane, but I think it's kind of being glossed over because everything else is insane right now.
Sure,
they benched Matt Ryan after 7 weeks for Sam Ehlinger just because their offensive line's so bad and they wanted some mobile quarterback. But this is Matt Ryan. This isn't just anybody. They benched Matt Ryan after 7 weeks. I mean, insanity has kind of become just the norm with the Colts. And I think the Parks Frazier move was just kind of like, all right, cool. We're doing this now.
Is this a complete rebuild then? And what's that mean for Chris Ballard? Because rebuild usually means you need a new guy to start that thing over. And I've been a fan of Chris Ballard. I think he's done a good job of drafting and developing. I think maybe we're seeing in the NFL that just drafting and developing is not enough. And like the Rams showed us, and we've seen a lot of competitive teams now, and with the salary cap raising, you kind of got to go for it a little bit more. Right. More like, maybe Major League Baseball teams do at the deadline. And we've seen a lot more trades now at the deadline. And maybe, we saw it with DeForest Buckner. Maybe they needed more of that to be like, okay, we got to get better everywhere right now to get ready to win. So is this rebuild? Is it not? What does it mean for Chris Ballard?
Yeah, so Buckner and Leonard and Nelson on the block then after, who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, honestly, we could go for a whole show just on Chris Ballard and where his successes and where his failures came with his time with the Colts. But man, Jim Irsay had a call with Bob Kravitz, who's one of our beat reporters here in Indy, and said, we're not tanking. We're expecting Jeff Saturday to turn this around. And, who knows? Jeff Saturday said, Jim Irsay said 2 weeks ago that Frank Reich was safe and Matt Ryan was their quarterback and stuff like that. So things obviously change every single day. Who's going to get fired next Monday? We've had a different firing or benching every single Monday for the past month here in Indy. But yeah, man, I don't know what they are. And I don't think they know what they are right now, because as someone who just covers this team, and I've covered a lot of bad teams, I came from Washington before I came to this market. So I know bad teams and I've grown up with bad teams. they are a bad team. They're not a team that can make the playoffs. They're not a team that can win in the playoffs, but you can't go out and say that to your season ticket holders. You can't say that to your fan bases. But
Right.
the thing is, we don't know what they are even behind the scenes. We don't know if they think that Jeff Saturday can turn this around. We don't know if they think Parks Frazier is some wonder kid, some Sean McVay, and we don't know if they think Sam Ehlinger can be their quarterback of the future. We really have no clue. We're in some really uncharted territory right now with the Indianapolis Colts, and again, that press conference just did nothing to kind of tell us the direction of this team. Will Chris Ballard be here next year? We have no clue. We have he said, of course he expects him back, but it wasn't really said with any kind of certainty. Chris Ballard barely said anything in that entire press conference. And the only thing he did say was, more telling the media like, oh, you got on me for not taking receivers. And now look at the offensive line. And then he didn't say anything the rest of the time. So yeah, man, we're in really uncharted territory right now with the Colts. And I don't know if they're a rebuilding team, if they're a soft rebuild team, if they're a hard reset team, or if they're a team that's going to trade for another veteran quarterback next year and think they can convince everybody that they're a playoff team again.
Last thing I have for you, Zach, and this is going to sound harsh, but this is a bad team, and bad teams usually start with bad ownership. And I think Jim's dad was a terrible owner, and Jim's starting to resemble him more and more, at least from afar. Is this too extreme? You said you're young to this, but it was a 50-50 split at the time. They easily could have taken Ryan Leaf instead of Peyton Manning. Let's say they take Leaf, and the next time they get the first overall pick, the guy named Luck doesn't luck into them. I think they may have been the Lions.
Yeah, there's, Jim Irsay again in that press conference kept saying, like, I've never hired a losing coach, or I've never this and that, and trust me and all that. It's like NFL is a game of inches, not only on the field, but off the field. Those decisions you make. If you don't take Andrew Luck and you take RG3, where's your franchise? You would have hired a losing coach if you took RG3. And going back to Ryan Leaf, you absolutely would have hired a losing coach if you had taken Ryan Leaf. Not many franchises are blessed with taking John Elway and Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck with your first overall picks. There's a lot of Jamarcus Russells. There's a lot of just absolute bust. And so much of this game is luck and lucking into the right situations and the right times. And I think a lot of Colts fans are going to learn that. Because again, I told you, I come from the Washington market. I've seen some really bad teams. I've seen some really bad playoff droughts. And I don't think Colts fans or Colts ownership even understands how bad it can really get. You can be in quarterback purgatory. I mean, they've been in quarterback purgatory for a couple years. Imagine that being 20 or 30 years, like some of these teams. I'm with you, man. I think this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I say that as someone even speaking from an optimistic point of view. I do think this is going to get a bit worse before it gets better for the Colts.
All right. Sounds like at best case scenario, it is sort of evaluation mode for the Indianapolis Colts the rest of the season. Thank you so much, Zach, for joining us here and trying to make some sense of this. If you guys want to get more in-depth coverage of the Indianapolis Colts, of course, you can check out Zach doing Locked On Colts daily here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and follow him on Twitter, Zach Hicks 2. Zach, appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, of course, guys. Thank you.
Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props and odds than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And our friends at Blue Nile. Whether you're looking to pop the question, have a milestone to celebrate, or want to let your love sparkle, Blue Nile can help you make your celebrations even more memorable. As the original online jeweler, Blue Nile offers the largest selection of independently graded diamonds and pieces priced significantly below traditional retailers. Blue Nile's helped millions of couples create their perfect engagement ring. Their easy online tools let you choose the diamond size, shape, clarity, and setting style. Then Blue Nile's bench jewelers will help you handcraft her perfect one-of-a-kind engagement ring. The holidays are coming up. You want to just get something special for somebody, maybe a gift for mom. You can have Blue Nile's jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. And Blue Nile has a 100% satisfaction guarantee. All orders are insured and shipped free in discreet packaging. They can also overnight shipping if you're in a rush. So make your moment sparkle with Blue Nile. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. That's Blue Nile, BLUENILE.com, code Locked On to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. BlueNile.com, promo code Locked On. How big is this injury for Josh Allen that he suffered in Week 9?
I think it's the story of the week. Well, Colts craziness aside, I mean, he's an MVP candidate. He's right there neck and neck with Pat Mahomes, is really the best player, most important player on the planet. If this was, I'm not picking on the Colts, if this was the AFC South, rest him for a month. You know what I mean? With where the Bills are. Probably win a game or two with Keenum. But you already lost to the Jets and you already lost to the Dolphins. So sure, you're number 1 or 2 in the power ranks. That doesn't matter in playoff seedings. You're not guaranteed to win the division, let alone even get in as a wild card in the AFC. I mean, if this was 5 of the other divisions, I wouldn't sweat it at all. Minnesota has 1 loss. That's who you're playing this week. You know, I mean, are the Bills a dog against the Vikes without Allen?
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you're kind of in a hole.
And actually, and I think this is sort of part of it with the Josh Allen injury, but with the loss is a big part of it. And look, you can't blame the loss to the Jets on this because it happened at the very end of the game too. So according to BetOnline, the new betting favorite for the Super Bowl this year is the Philadelphia Eagles. So they have surpassed both the Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills there. So that tells you what
easier path
like this can mean. And there might not be a more important player in the NFL to what this season looks like the rest of the way. It would be either Allen or Mahomes, right? And maybe even more so Allen than Mahomes. Just looking at those rosters, looking at
in a way,
because the Chiefs have a better offensive line. Neither one of the teams run the ball great, but I would say the Bills would have a more difficult time recovering with no Allen than even the Chiefs would with no Mahomes, even though both teams would, be drastically different. So this is a huge injury. And if it's 1 week that he has to sit to make sure he's right and you don't re-injure him worse, then I think you got to sit him. But of course, we see in the NFL all the time, these guys are competitors. You want to have your guy out there. And so we'll see what it ends up looking like. But you hope this isn't something that really nags Josh Allen the rest of the season, because that would just be a huge bummer as a sports fan.
Oh, 100%. That would really be a bummer. No question about it. Now, these are certainly rich people problems. No one's crying for the Bills right now. You could be in the Colts shoes, keep going back to them. And hopefully this doesn't derail them too long. But the one criticism I have had of the Colts or of the Bills is you're really a little bit too reliant on Allen and Diggs. Like, that's a great offense. Again, these are rich people problems, but who else is an above average starter on that offense, let alone a star? That's a little bit, all I'm saying is that's a little bit more fragile than some of the other environments.
And maybe a reminder, and I know it didn't happen on a running play for Josh Allen. It happened in the pocket, but you're still trying to protect your quarterbacks in the pocket. Maybe it's a wake-up call to the Bills, and this is more of an off-season thing looking into the future. And probably when he comes back, I think you have to rely less on Josh Allen, the runner, too, because you don't want your star quarterback to get hit that much. And he's a big, strong guy, but you see some of these carries he's taken. It's like, man, this guy's, you don't want him to turn into Cam Newton by the time he's 30. His, shoulder or elbow is just, beaten into dust. You don't want that either for your young quarterback. It's great now and it helps you win games, but I think that's the biggest reason why I think at the deadline they might have, Nyheim Hines was a good addition, but more of a receiver than a runner. I think they need to, in the offseason, really look at how they
big picture thing,
how they deploy their running game. Right.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think they could use a Jerome Bettis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All these scat backs are great, but you're going to have a lot of leads. You might need, Derrick Henry. I mean, it's just a second round pick that's a 230-pound back that you can just hand the ball over and over.
Well, they tried that with Zach Moss and it didn't quite work.
Right,
right. Not just a big guy, but the right big guy, the right bruiser. Yeah. Instead of making your quarterback take all of those hits. So yeah, a lot to consider here for the second half of the season. 2 huge stories with the Colts and the Bills. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.